On the 4th day of the 6th month of the 9824th year after the founding of the Imperium, I sit here writing this. I am the renowned sorcerer, Tracurius. I know not my parents, for I was abandoned at birth. I do, however, possess knowledge of one thing, and that thing is that I'm about to embark on an impossibly dangerous, most ludicrous, and nigh impossible mission. It has been a year since the opening of the portal, the changing of the fates of thousands, if not millions. The mythical humans, who were so magically deficient that the greatest of them couldn't perform even the most basic of spells, had come out of this massive portal. Some say they were a curse to the world of Narivor, others say they were a blessing. Whatever you consider them to be, you can't deny their sheer power. They have conquered worlds we can't even begin to imagine. They have magicless magic, which is capable of performing feats our greatest sorcerers can't even dream of. And they have conquered the fortress of Halamund and established themselves a permanent, strong political entity. The stalwart fortress city of Halamund held back dozens of the Ammonic incursions and was renowned for its blood, steel, and warriors. During the dark of night, the humans conquered it within 3 bloody hours. All 3,500 soldiers permanently garrisoned were taken by surprise as strange contraptions flew balls hotter than fire at them, going through their armor like a knife through hot butter. Of course, the attack on Halamund had a reason. The dwarves had killed the human emissaries when they arrived at Halamund, believing them to be Emini in disguise. This prompted the human attack of the Stoic fortress, which saw the dwarves humiliated and the humans elevated onto the political stage. Despite their grand accomplishments, they are still distrusted by the majority of the nobility, and the superstitious peasantry see them as naught but evil demons. However, there is one people with a particular interest in them which goes further than just leeching off their magicless magic, or trying to drag them into one of their petty political squabbles. These are the Amini, the dark folk of the cold north. Any sane, holy creature with common sense would reject these abominations outright. However, humans are neither sane nor holy, and they certainly don't have common sense. As such, they decided to negotiate with these unholy creatures. Not the ratmen, minotaurs, orcs, dwarves, and even the clinically insane beast folk haven't tried to do such a ridiculous and frankly idiotic thing. Then again, no other race has tried to build a speech ship and try to sail the realm of Astraleek. And so here I am, on my way to Gruntharn, a Ammonic fortress, on my way to prostrate myself to the humans and beg them to quit this foolish endeavor. My liege has already arranged for me to meet a particularly wealthy and influential human called Patricia of House Williams. Besides being rather wealthy, she's also the leading diplomat of the ludicrous make-friends with literal baby-eating monsters operation the humans are conducting. May Fortunus bless me, lest the unholy abominations break my will. Tracurius smiled. He had made it. After a 2-month-long journey, he was at Gruntharn, home of the sinister Trisgar clan of Ammoni, and a host of human diplomats and their servants. He looked around him. For a Aeomonic castle, it was awfully peaceful. Around the castle, he saw fields and farms. The sun shone today, and the small lake about 5 kilometers from the castle was glistening. The castle itself was an impressive display of might. It had a sinister and dark aura emanating from it. Its architecture was very utilitarian, hard, and rough. It was in stark contrast to the architecture of most imperial castles, who, while being made for war, were also a display of elegance and art. But this building was brutish and harsh, like the people who inhabited it. Flanking Tracurius were 2 of the most valiant knights, Tiravir and Alanius. Both of them were known for their ability to spit in the face of death, having survived several things they really shouldn't have. Behind them, there was an entire entourage of cooks, cleaners, and other menial staff. There were also several translators and scribes to document whatever we were about to witness here. They were also accompanied by the 5th Imperial Regiment, a group of men-at-arms who were renowned for their use of pikes. Tracurius nodded at his entourage. "Come on now, let's not keep our hosts waiting," he said. As he took a step forwards, he felt the anxiety in the room. It was understandable. What they were about to do was idiotic. However, they had to press onwards, and as such Tracurius went forth at the very tip of the group. He hoped it would embolden others to follow his example. It worked, mostly. When they reached the gates, they were met with sight of two soldiers. Both of them had those strange contraptions the humans were known for. They were in gray metallic armor. However, this wasn't regular plate armor. It wasn't magical either. It was something different. Both of them had a strange sort of visor. It was completely black, and yet he could feel their eyes looking at him. One of them said something, however Tricurius couldn't understand them. For a few seconds they were talking in that language of theirs. It sounded like someone took Elvish and forcibly added a dialect of Dwarven, and then decided to mix it with words he couldn't even grasp the concept of. Then they spoke in his tongue, Elvish. It sounded flawless, without an accent, perfected through years of study. However, these humans had only known the existence of Elvish for a year at most. It also sounded processed, like a golem was talking, and not a man. "You are the elven emissaries, yes?" one of the soldiers asked. It wasn't like a golem was speaking. This had to be a golem. Elven is considered one of the most difficult languages to learn, and these humans managed to speak it flawlessly within less than a year of study. Tricurius nodded. "Correct. I assume we are expected," he said as he smiled a diplomatic smile. The heavily armored soldier nodded. "Yes, you are." The man pointed to the other soldier. "Corporal Johnson here will be escorting you to the keep. There you will meet with Lieutenant Carlson, who will help you with your future endeavors." Corporal Johnson turned around and pressed some button on his wrist. Suddenly the gate opened. Tricurius looked up in awe as several tons of steel were lifted up without seeing anyone or anything which was actually doing it. The corporal waved his hand indicating they should follow. They did. They walked through the large metallic gate. Tricurius looked out into the castle. To the right was a small tavern. To the left of him was a smithery, and in the distance he saw a well and a large storage house. Houses were scattered all around the area, and he could see a market in front of the storage house. The corporal started walking. They followed. Eventually they reached a hill. On top was the keep. The architecture was as brutish on the inside as on the outside. Outside of the keep he saw several strange iron blocks, mounted on what he could only assume were wheels made out of a strange black material. Around it were some strange creatures. "These must be the humans," Tricurius said under his breath. They were as tall, if not taller, than most elves, and yet they were nearly as broad as a dwarf. They wore green uniforms. With black boots he looked at one of their faces. The soldier had some strange metal etched into his eye. It looked horrifying. Perhaps it was a punishment. After all, no holy creature would defile their body like that. The corporal halted and turned around to face the elves. "Wait here. I shall return quickly," he said, as the corporal sprinted towards the entrance of the keep. Tricurius was amazed at how quickly the corporal moved in that full set of armor. Perhaps some kind of magic made it lighter. But the humans didn't have magic. There had to be some logical explanation for this. Did the Emini curse the humans with magic? But the Emini couldn't curse, nor could they bless. They didn't have gods, considering the holy ones to be foul tricksters who should be treated with apathy. A few minutes later and the soldier returned. A shorter human was accompanying him, as well as a particularly hairy dwarf and a rather tall Emini. The human stepped forward and extended his hand. Like most other races, the human had 5 fingers. Tricurius didn't know what he was supposed to, so he decided to be as courteous as he could be. He bowed deeply and started speaking. "Greetings, sir. I assume you are Lieutenant Carlson?" he asked. The human smiled and retracted his hand and hastily made some attempt at a low bow. "You would be correct in that assumption." The human paused for a moment. "So, who do I have the pleasure of meeting?" he asked. Tricurius wondered what to do for a moment. "I am the High Emissary, Tricurius. I was told you would get us to our quarters for tonight." Carlson nodded. "I will, but first you need to know a few things." Carlson spoke. "First of all, none of this is magic. Don't try and use magic on it. It usually results in fires, death, or a combination of the two," he said in a stern voice, like a father explaining to his son the rules of the house. "Second off," the Emini handed the human several sheets of paper. "Read this and sign it." Carlson handed Tracurius the sheet of paper. Tracurius eagerly inspected it. It was in Elven. It was also grammatically correct. It was rare for the lesser races to actually know how to speak Elven, let alone write it. But the humans had outdone themselves when they didn't just write it. They wrote it well. It took a moment for Tracurius to read the whole thing. The beginning section was outlining the punishments for any transgression, the second about the rules themselves, and the third about the fact that any transgression of Elven law wasn't going to be punished by humanity. After he was finished reading, the human gave him a strange instrument which seemed to have infinite ink, as he didn't need to dip it into any for it to work. He signed the contract. When he was done signing, he was surprised to hear that anyone in his service had to read and sign it as well. That was going to be a bit of a problem since not everyone could read, let alone write. So they agreed to read the rules out loud to everyone in his service, and they would give their verbal consent to the rules. After it was over, Carlson ordered them to follow him. Tracurius followed Carlson with both enthusiasm and a tinge of anxiety. When he entered the keep, he noticed several things. First of all, there were no torches, yet the entire hallway was illuminated. There were metallic constructs attached to the ceiling which were somehow projecting light. Despite there not being any Ternitia being the general name for all types of magic and energy, floating about he could sense thunder. Perhaps runes? No, that couldn't be. Runes stored Ternitia, and there weren't any thunder mages around either. Perhaps they trapped lightning. However, lightning wasn't a very common thing. They simply wouldn't have enough for it. Tracurius set aside the thought for a moment and continued following Carlson. The walls were almost stainless white. He couldn't see the stone underneath it. Who would spend so much time and effort on making their walls a pretty shade of white? Tracurius wondered. When they finally arrived at their quarters, his courtiers were all put into separate rooms. How many rooms did they construct? Tracurius wondered. Tracurius himself was escorted into an especially luxurious room. Carlson spoke. "See this switch here?" He pointed at it and flicked it. The lights were suddenly dimmed, then flicked it again, and the room was illuminated. "It controls the lights." Tracurius was in awe. Not only did they have thunder without magic, they also controlled it. It was awe-inducing, really. The sheer wealth of technology, science, and new techniques they could pick up from these humans was incredible. However, sadly, he wasn't on a technological exchange mission. He was here to prevent a third Eomonic War. The first Eomonic War took place in 3,563 after the founding of the Imperium. Thousands, if not more, died. It was only due to the intervention of the incredibly zealous dwarves that ensured the Imperium would not collapse. The second war was even worse, causing the dwarves to shatter into several clay clans united under a high king, however still very much divided in different factions. The first of these factions were the Voron. They considered it their duty to conserve the ancient ways. The ancient ways included honoring Astraliac above others. After all, he created the universe, and he was as supremely powerful as he was fickle. He bound the gods to the world, and then ensured they would not destroy it, as parts of the gods were spread around the world creating the various races. Their calendar is a countdown to the rebirth of nations, which would see both the gods and the world devoured by Astraliac and reabsorbed into the infinite void that is the universe. The second were the Leoans. They shunned Astraliac instead of honoring him, and followed the pantheon of the three divine ones. Guerin, god of war and the bow, Hartarn, god of victory, Pain and Smiths and Last Trinestarn, god of death and the afterlife. A third Eomonic invasion could spell doom for the remaining dwarven clans, the end of the Imperium, and perhaps even the annihilation of the beast races. The sheer power the humans held could not fall into the hands of the Amoni, lest they use it to shatter and destroy the world as we know it. Tracurius was forcibly pulled out of his thoughts when Carlson started speaking. "Right, so this is a shower," he pointed at it, "and that is a toilet." He pointed at the second thing. He stepped into the sewer. He gripped an iron mechanism. Pulling it up towards the red side makes the water warmer. Pulling it down towards the blue side makes it colder. He then gripped another metal mechanism. Pulling this up will increase the water flow. He pulled it up, and suddenly water came flooding out from it. and pulling it down will decrease it. Was there an element they couldn't control? Tricurius wondered. These humans didn't just have incredibly powerful weaponry. They could probably at least provide water for an entire army with these shewers. No need for you know how it works just yet. Just don't try to use magic on it, please. Carlson said the last part in a tired and, quite frankly, desperate tone. It was like someone had already tried to do that, and it ended in a disaster. Not all that unlikely, Tricurius reasoned. I understand. Do I need to know anything else? Tricurius asked the human. The human shook his head. No, this will be it for today. You can get food at the cafeteria. We've got cooks working there from 6 in the morning to 9 in the evening. The human said. He turned around and started walking towards the exit. And have a good evening, the human said on his way out. Tricurius simply stood there for a few moments in awe of everything he had just seen. He knew the humans were supposed to be advanced, but they were leagues ahead of the most well-developed nation on the world, Narrate, the Elven Imperium. Unless you counted the Aemonic settlements who had invented and popularized the widespread use of gunpowder 30 years prior to this very moment. Then again, gunpowder alone was far weaker than sorcery. He decided to meet up with his 2 knights and eat something. He hadn't eaten for an entire day at this point, so he was quite hungry. To his surprise, the 2 knights were already waiting outside. Sir, what is our plan of action? Trivir, one of the knights, asked. I'll probably go and eat something at this cafeteria the human mentioned. He said it would serve food to us. Tricurius said. The knights looked at him and nodded, forming a wedge formation around him. He followed the directions some humans he encountered gave him to the cafeteria until he eventually arrived there. It was a large, spacious room, with those same white metallic torches on the ceiling. There were 3 windows looking over the courtyard, where there were more of those iron constructions on black wheels as well as more humans. The sun was already setting. It must be evening. For a moment, he wondered how the humans would keep track of time. He reasoned they probably used some unreasonably advanced system to make sure the time was accurate to the second. Tricurius ordered something called a steak, which according to the human cook was very similar to narrate's, which he always thoroughly enjoyed. The human was not lying when he said it was similar to narrate's. He got the same sensations and the same taste of well-cooked narrate's as he got with this steak. The knights too ate something the human called chicken breast, alongside potatoes and some fresh water. Tricurius himself got to experience the joys of tea. According to the humans, it was funny that he enjoyed it. Something about Imperials always liking the tasteful beverage. Some of his entourage had joined in on the meal, and he got to discuss some potential diplomatic strategies with one of the historians he brought alongside him. He also discussed how humans utilized thunder with one of his sorcerers. He speculated they didn't use thunder. Instead, they just used energy which was contained in thunder. An interesting thought for sure. At the end of this useful dinner, he went to bed, as did most of his entourage. Perhaps he could meet the leading human diplomat tomorrow.